Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to this WECA Scrutiny meeting. This meeting is being broadcast on the WECA YouTube page. If members could please mute their microphones when they're not speaking, that would be helpful. Apologies for any absence. Ian, have we got apologies?
We've had apologies from Councillor Carol Johnson. She is hoping to join the meeting later on, though, Chair. So.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Has any members got any declarations of interest for items on today's agenda?
Just in terms of housing delivery, I'm the board member of a housing association, Alliance Homes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Hugh. That's noted. No other hands. Minutes of previous meeting. We've seen the minutes of the meeting in December. Is everybody happy that's a correct record of that meeting? Those who were there? Any points to be raised? Yes, please, Hal. Oh, sorry. Okay. Anybody got any points to raise on those minutes? I'm happy with them, so I'll sign those, Ian, as a true record. Next, items from the public. So we've had a number of statements and questions. Who we got in the waiting room, Ian?
So we have 3 members of the public in the waiting room. So first of all, I'm going to let David Redswell into the meeting to present his statement, Chair.
Thank you.
Should be connecting just now.
Hi, David, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome. Go ahead, you've got 3 minutes.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to summarise by saying I think we need to continue to progress the North Somerset membership of WECA. The very useful meeting that Marvin Rees had with the Bristol Growth and Regeneration Committee showed that from Tim Borrett that there are ways of bringing North Somerset in even with a WECA mere election, and that's in doubt this year, as all elections are. So I would ask the Scrutiny Commission to get on and look at governance, look at the arrangements for a deal, and look at ways of making sure North Somerset Council joins the West Midlands Combined Authority as soon as possible, even if it means in between a mayoral election. That's my first point. My second point is really around COVID-19. I've first put on record the work that Peter Mann's done in keeping all the buses moving. He's done an awful lot of work on that. But I would like to draw to your attention, we still need more police officers, PCSOs and COVID marshals on the bus network across the 4 unitary authorities. There was an incident involving a nurse getting spat at on a bus recently. It's being dealt with by the Avon and Somerset Police, but policing of masks, policing of buses is very, very important. And of course, there are special services now to the vaccination centre in Bath, and others are being laid on to the, hopefully, to the Bath and West Showground in Shepton Mallet. On light rail, it's so schismatic as we're not sure what the plans are. The Mayor announced the plans for mass rapid transit, but there's no routes. It's just 4 schismatic ideas and really no detail in the press release. And although a lot of us support that proposal and very much support what Marvin's trying to do and Tim, but it's very important that we do try and get some flesh on the bones. And I'd be grateful if we can just have a look at that consultation and make sure that consultation is actually real and is about a system, because it looks like it's a team of consultants at the moment, which brings me on to my next point. The West Midlands Combined Authority with Andy Streets has a complete railway executive, which deals with light rail and heavy rail. And we need to make sure in WECA that they beef up their rail division. Said it cabinet last night at Bristol as well, to make sure they've got officers. What we should be doing is bringing all these officers away from the 3 local authorities into WECA, the transport officers, the major ones, make sure we can set up departments so Peter Mann's public transport unit can grow bigger, and make sure we cover off those particular services. Really, it should be a bigger and much stronger West England Combined Authority. I think the other one is to make sure that Portway Park and Ride, I'm being assured that Network Rail will build it by December this year, but I'm very concerned that we need to make sure that that goes ahead and we get the spades in the ground and it's open along with a new timetable between Avonmouth and Westbury in Wiltshire. And also on that same thing, the let money and construction starts on the Western Supermare public transport interchange outside Tesco's, which is a very important project. If those projects aren't started, we will lose the money. So absolutely crucial. The blades, spades, bulldozers, whatever, tree cutters in Western have to be in the ground before the 31st of March. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, you'd be interested to know that prior to this meeting, we've agreed to have a special meeting of this committee about the enlargement of WECA, to include our friends in North Somerset, which will be happening in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, we're going to explore the possibilities that are there, including the possibilities of them joining between elections. So thank you for your help.
Okay, we obviously welcome a devolution deal, and particularly bus precepting powers so that WECA can precept rather than relying on local authorities to keep the bus services running. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, Ian.
Okay, next chair is statement 2 from Dick Daniel. So I'm just submitting him to the meeting now.
Hello, Dick. Welcome. Hello, Dick. Welcome to the meeting. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good. My first question is, have you watched the Ghent? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm speaking and
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me. Good. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I've got the sorry, I had the YouTube on. Thank you. My first question is, have you watched the Ghent video that I put the link at the bottom of my submission? Please do. WECA's research shows that people want good active travel options, that is cycling and walking, and a mass transit network, and this has got to be trams. Why are these solutions? Well, because needs in areas and want to get to places locally. Because
Dick. Hello, Dick. Can I just stop you for a sec?
Yes.
We're struggling with the sound. You might want to switch the video
Yes.
off so you might get more bandwidth for the sound.
Oh, okay. Is this? Can you hear me better? Okay. Did you hear what I was saying earlier, or?
We heard what you were starting to say about trams, but we just lost you after that.
Okay. Let me just go back to that bit. Yes. So cycling and walking and mass transit, which has got to be trams. Why are these the solutions? Well, most journeys, short journeys, and most people live in urban areas and want to get to places locally. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
WECA states that half of all commutes are under 5 kilometres. That's 3 miles. That is a 20-minute cycle ride or a 10 or 15-minute tram or bus ride. So what is the solution? Well, combining active travel, i.e. safe segregated cycle routes, and a backbone of tram lines which are fed by a comprehensive bus network. Also, restricting the ease of motor vehicles to dominate our cities, towns and streets. Add to this the public health disaster of obesity and inactivity, the climate emergency, and the need to have a thriving economy. Remember, people who walk and cycle to shops spend more time and go to more shops when they're there. So what is needed to achieve this? The region needs an integrated transport authority. This is to raise the money, to argue the case with national government, and to coordinate the action. Transport is crucial to the well-being and health of people. A healthy population is a happier and more productive population. The big thing is to take action now. We really need to get on and actually do these things. That is my statement.
Thank you very much, Dick. Next, Ian.
So the final person attending today, Chair, is statement 4, Tony Lloyd, and I'll admit him to the meeting now.
Thank you.
Should just be connecting now.
Hello, Tony. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
Welcome to the meeting. You've got 3
Thank
minutes.
you. I have 2 minutes. Okay.
3.
3 minutes, right. Good morning, everybody. I'm representing Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways, and I just want to restrict my comments to one item on your agenda today, and that is the North Fringe Public Infrastructure Package, which forms part of the investment fund proposals. We know that even in normal times, the A38 and all the other roads in the Filton area are heavily congested. Now, on top of this, there's soon going to be pressure to increase this even more due to the new housing at Cribbs Patchway New Neighbourhood and the activities and events at the YTL Brabazon Arena. So, you know, for that reason, it's obviously necessary to look at all the transport requirements. And so a comprehensive transport assessment study is to be welcomed. However, it's the actual details of the transport assessment that are very important to the final outcome. By this, I mean the remit to the consultants about the aims and required outcomes. And looking through the project background, and that's what I've done, section of the proposal for this package, it appears to be solely fixated on highway improvements. And there does not appear to be a need to look in depth at the role of public transport in reducing the need for car journeys and thus new roads and infrastructure. I hope I'm wrong, but it doesn't look very good when I read the project background. I would, of course, hope that the study will take account of the proposed Metrobus service, and maybe that is going to be built into the study. However, coming to rail, there is a mention of the North Filton proposed station, but it's not clear that the potential of the Henbury Spur to reduce traffic congestion will be properly taken into account, and it ought to be. Not only looking at the proposed hourly service, but also perhaps to look at the effect of a more frequent service, say 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. What would that do to the reducing traffic? Also, what would be the effect of opening the line to Avonmouth, the Henbury Loop, and or even providing a direct service to Parkway via the Filton Diamond? All this is to increase the amount of public transport and does need to be built in, I believe. The fear is that the transport assessment will draw up a car-centric plan, not properly reviewing all the ways by which car usage can be reduced. And I note that the project apparently does have a strategy for limiting the use of car-borne trips and supporting the climate change.
Last 30 seconds, Tony.
And all I can say is that I hope this will be borne out when the transport assessment study is carried out. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Thank you very much. That's all the people waiting, I think, Ian, is that right?
Yes, Chair, that concludes the statements.
Okay, thank you very much. We've just to reassure the public, we read these statements in advance. We see the questions and we see the answers, and we do note them. So thank you very much for your involvement. Next is Chair's business. The only business I would have really, I mean, this is a public meeting, and I don't really think any public meeting should go by without us recognising the great hardship and caused by COVID, the many people who've died in the region. And I think, I'm sure as a committee, we acknowledge that. We also acknowledge the hard work of the people who are on the front line, so to speak, including medical people, but also including people like the refuse disposal, the bus drivers, all the frontline people working in supermarkets, all of those people. So I'd just like to, on behalf of this committee, to send our condolences. I know it sounds like empty words, but I would like to send our genuine condolences to people who are ill and people who had friends and relatives who've died, and in support of all those key workers. So perhaps that could be noted on the minutes, if that's okay. I'm happy to let anybody add anything if they like. I don't see any hands, so that's fine. Thank you. So next is the review of the papers for Friday's WECA and West of England Joint Committee meeting. We've had those papers for a few days now, and we're going to go through them in, what's the first one? Is it the infrastructure reports we're going to go through first? Is that right, Ian?
Suggesting we look at the infrastructure reports first, Chair. David Carter, our Director of Infrastructure, should be joining the meeting very shortly. The first item we were going to look at was item 12, the West of England Housing Delivery Strategy. Karen Ross, who's the author of that report, is with us, so she could give you a quick introduction, Chair, and then perhaps an opportunity for member comment and questions.
Thank you. I can't see Karen. Oh, hello, Karen. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to brief us. Oh, sorry, let's just get rid of my phone. Yeah, would you like to give us a short briefing? We've got, how long have we got for the whole item, Ian?
Well, just 30 to 40 minutes for the infrastructure section, Chair.
Which is three separate items. So really only 4 or 5 minutes, if that's okay, Karen.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's fine. So just a very brief overview. The housing delivery strategy, it's come together around the funding opportunities that became available in the investment fund. But we see it as setting a framework for a longer term approach that can encompass other funding streams and strategic partnership arrangements over a kind of 10-year period. So what it does is it sets out our ambition to increase and accelerate housing delivery, particularly affordable housing, by supporting priority locations where there's market failure. It explains how we'll intervene at strategic level to maximise the impact of collaborative working to make a greater impact and add value. And it explains that by taking a strategic approach, we'll deliver better value for the public purse and better outcomes for communities. So the key aims of the strategy are to intervene to deliver pace, quality and affordable homes, deliver better outcomes than are usually delivered in the market. And what I mean by that is, for example, developers will want to provide the sort of housing that they want to sell. And what we want to developers to provide is the sort of housing that our communities need, and that's across all tenures. So that sort of thing. To focus on the added value from taking a strategic approach. And what I mean by that is around working with partners. So, for example, housing associations and Homes England principally have funding to invest in the West of England in housing delivery. And what this strategy does is it creates a mechanism and a process for us to work closely in collaboration. So that's across the UAs, obviously, but also bringing in those other partners to make sure that we're focusing on shared and agreed priorities. And what's very important as part of the strategy is setting out a compelling case to government that the West of England's a priority place for investment. Obviously our shared narrative there and the fact that we're working together collaboratively and that partnership is absolutely key to delivery is kind of part of that our kind of shop front, if you like, in terms of that. So there's quite a bit of detail in the strategy and in the report itself, which I guess I don't need to go through again, but what I just wanted to sort of flag is that what the strategy does is it provides a route map for sites from acquisition to delivery. And it is built around the opportunity to draw down some capital funding from the investment fund. And there's an initial £40 million package. That will give us some regional autonomy in terms of being able to focus that on our genuine regional objectives. What this strategy also does is it includes a suite of interventions that can be developed over time. So there's a lot of hooks in the strategy around things that we could potentially do as and when the authorities want us to look at them. So the sort of things I'm talking about there are sort of risk sharing arrangements or forward funding of capital receipts to allow the councils to put their sites in, but delay in order to sort of share the effects of possibly delaying the capital receipt coming in. The last point on the strategy is that it includes our approach to innovation in construction and delivery, and that's around working with the Bristol Housing Festival as one of our key partners in terms of how we can sort of make that sort of pivot in making what's called modern methods of construction more of a kind of normal form of construction that we kind of go to more universally across the board than is the case now. So that's just a kind of a very brief intro. Does anyone have any questions on the strategy?
I've got one, but I'll come to Vari and then Hal.
Hi there. I had a couple of questions. So my first one is I find it tends to be best practice to kind of define terms, particularly when they can be ambiguous. I noticed there wasn't really a definition around affordable homes. How are we defining that, and could that be put in the strategy is my first question. And then my second question is I feel like there was like some contradictory statements within the actual strategy itself. So you say that obviously the aim of this strategy is to add value strategically, but then with another hand saying there's not going to be any coordination of the local authorities, that they're sitting separately in terms of their housing delivery. How are you squaring that contradiction? So, you know, how are you expecting local authorities to kind of work within this strategy, and how will that then influence things like their local plans and housing development and delivery strategies as well?
Fine. So on affordable housing, there is a definition of affordable housing that's in national planning policy, and that's what I mean by affordable housing in this strategy. I completely accept that we could make that a bit clearer in the strategy. Yeah. I'm more than happy to do that, that's fine. I should flag that the government has changed the definition of affordable housing over the last year, and it now includes aspirational home ownership as part of the affordable housing definition. I know I'm probably going into too much detail now, but we have commissioned a local housing needs assessment, which we're waiting for that to be provided, which will set out exactly what the projected need is for each category. So it's kind of felt like that's too much detail to go into in this strategy. But we will be looking to meet affordable housing that meets the national definition.
That really worries me, because obviously Bristol City Council has a separate definition, and I think as a region we should be ambitious and we should respond to the actual need of our residents rather than some arbitrary pseudo definition that the government has come up with. So I think that really does need to be a discussion. I suppose this is probably outside of this politically. And it goes back to my second question around the contradiction between local authorities and how they're defining things like affordable housing, and then how that then sits in with a strategic housing delivery strategy, because there then becomes additional contradictions because you've got local authorities meaning completely different things in the content actually within the strategy.
Yeah, I think
Karen,
oh, sorry.
Karen, I think you'd be relatively brief in the answer. That's okay. There's a few people waiting.
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. Everyone will be aware that we're working on a spatial development strategy, and that what we are intending to do under that is have a shared approach to affordable housing, including a definition. All I can do at the moment is work on the government definition, to be honest, but it is a work in progress. In terms of your second question, just to be very quick. What we didn't want to do was just replicate what all the councils are doing individually, because that doesn't seem to add value. But what I would stress is that there's been an enormous amount of collaboration in getting this strategy together and all the UAs fully support it, and we've worked closely with the RPs and Homes England as well. So I think that there is a lot of that there's a high degree of agreement, if you see what I mean, with what we've done with it.
Thank you. Welcome, Carol. We just started the housing strategy section, so we're not too far on. Hal, you had your hand up.
Thank you.
Yes. Could you just explain to me properly what you mean by market failure, how this actually works for the land acquisition fund?
Yes, I mean the simplest way of defining it is that without any public sector intervention, the market won't deliver housing on the site in a timely or efficient manner, or alongside the plan requirements. So it's about getting a better outcome for the site and a quicker outcome for the site than we would get if we just left it to the market. So it fits with the pace and acceleration objectives in the strategy.
Right. Okay. Second one is on the Development Infrastructure Fund. If I understand it right, this would cover commercial activities. For example, stimulating an enterprise zone. That would be an appropriate thing to do, would it, with the Development Infrastructure Fund?
Yes, it would, in the context of delivering infrastructure that facilitates realising the outcomes set for the enterprise zones. Yes. Right.
And on the last one is the Housing and Regeneration Fund. Yeah. That is purely for housing, not for commercial. Is that right?
We do have the flexibility to look at employment sites under that fund as well as housing.
Okay, thanks very much.
I've got Brenda, then Hugh.
Thank you. As somebody who's got a big regeneration site in their council ward, I just wanted to stress how important it is to include participation with the residents and making sure they're involved in it at all times, because they have a lot of local knowledge as well that we need to tap into. And we found that having loads of consultation events with them, we're getting a lot of people on side as opposed to being in opposition.
Thank you for raising that, and we do appreciate the value of community-led housing, and that is referenced in the strategy.
Hugh.
Thank you very much, and thank you for answering just whether I can actually participate on this. So I was looking to know, firstly, really supportive of the land acquisition approach. In North Somerset, we took an approach to really actively look for land that could be used for social housing development, and both in the Millcross site in Clevedon and recently in Portishead, we've been able to do some real good work on housing delivery because of that. So I think that would be really good across the west of England. What I was looking to understand more, I was reading through the papers, but I'm afraid I haven't looked through much detail this time. Retrofit. Does the housing delivery strategy include helping retrofit homes? Because I think this is one area where housing associations really struggle across the board, like Southwest Homes, I think, which are or I might have gotten the name wrong, the board that represent all the housing associations have said, it's a real struggle focusing on retrofit when in the purpose for all housing associations is to build more homes. Retrofit is one area where they said that combined authorities, that local authorities can really add value. So is that within this, or would that be on the scope of a different paper?
I absolutely understand how important that is. This strategy is around driving delivery of new homes. So retrofit stuff is dealt with elsewhere, and there is some funding that housing associations can access on it. And I can contact you separately about that if that would be helpful.
Brilliant, that'd be fine.
Okay.
And yeah, just echoing Vari's comments on, social rent is the way forward. Affordable rent, well, the 80% affordable rent just doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got a question. Karen, have you got our papers in front of you the way that we've got the papers?
Yes, I can get them up.
Can you just go to page 21?
Page 21.
It's headed Agenda Item 10. I know. I'm jumping around a bit, but
is that in the scrutiny papers? The
yeah,
public reports pack scrutiny, right?
So it's talking about the joint. It's talking about the West of England housing delivery strategy, and its comments from the Planning and Housing Board. Do you see that there? It's got halfway down that page. It says the key aims of the housing delivery strategy were to, and then it lists a number of things, but it doesn't mention affordable housing.
Right. Okay.
In your strategy in Appendix 1, you say we need 30,000 affordable homes.
Yeah.
That worries me that this, there's a sort of mismatch going on here, or a miscommunication. Affordable homes, I mean, certainly in Bristol, are absolutely vital.
Yeah.
That makes me nervous that there's something going wrong with the system here. Are you able to explain that discrepancy?
Yes, and I apologise, that's probably just my fault in terms of the drafting, but because the absolute intention of the strategy is to support delivery of affordable housing. What we're intending to do is aiming to achieve policy compliance as an absolute minimum across the programme. And we want to explore whether there's an opportunity to increase affordable housing to up to 50% on suitable sites. And
I hear your words, but I sit on a planning committee in Bristol, and we're looking at 10%, never mind 50%. And so those are just words, really, aren't they? What are you actually doing to try and achieve that?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, where we were talking about getting better outcomes for communities from the stuff that goes through this strategy, and absolutely fundamental to that is getting the affordable housing right in the schemes. And so that's why we're aiming to not allow any schemes to go through unless they have policy compliant as an absolute minimum. Policy compliant in Bristol, I believe, would be between 30 and 40% affordable housing. That's what we'd be looking at as a basic requirement of the scheme. I mean, obviously I can't speak for other sites that are going through Bristol planning now. This is about the stuff that's going to come through under this strategy, but that is an absolutely fundamental principle that's kind of underpinning it.
And how will all this be impact on if the new government planning legislation goes through and it's effectively taken out of control of local authorities?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that.
No, Chair, I think what we'd have to do is review the policy. This is just an overarching strategy to enable us to move this forward. So any comments you have specifically, perhaps Karen could come and brief you separately. But otherwise, if you have any comments that you would like to raise with the meeting on Friday, then we could take those forward as part of your statement. Okay.
My second question is, I'm sorry, you were talking about affordable homes, and you mentioned a new definition, and you said, I didn't understand what you said, aspirational. Can you explain that to me?
Yes, what that means is that people who are currently in private rented housing typically, and can afford that housing, so they're not in housing need under the old definition, but they aspire to acquiring their own homes, they are now officially part of the affordable housing definition. So, and it's a group called, people who aspire to home ownership, essentially. So
when you're trying to work out how many affordable homes we need, they're taken into account in that calculation.
That is the new definition from the government. That's right. So the local housing needs assessment that we've commissioned is going to tell us what the projected figures are of people that fit within that cohort.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If you could use the electronic hands, that'd be great, because I'm looking at a couple of screens here.
Yes, if it's all right, Chair.
Sorry?
Yes, if it's all right, Chair.
Oh, yes, please, Hugh. Sorry, yeah, it's a good example.
I was just wondering, so in North Somerset, again, we put the huge risk that happened to pay off of putting a lot of money into the HIF bid, the Housing Infrastructure Fund bid. Is that sort of higher risk approach something that WECA would look into doing through this, or is it just too risky putting a lot of money into development of those sort of plans for housing delivery?
Do you want me to pick that one up, Karen?
Yes, please.
So I obviously have a bit of history with North Somerset's HIFBID, Councillor James. So it's a very good question. Those are very big pieces of structuring funding where there's a lot of housing, and it's not just housing. There is obviously a secondary school that's being funded by North Somerset's HIFBID as well in that area. So the West of England Combined Authority did look at, obviously did promote a HIFBID. That wasn't successful. North Somerset's was. The challenge that we both have is still the same, that you need infrastructure to deliver housing. Now, in the housing delivery strategy, that's recognised. So one of the funds that it's associated with the housing delivery strategy that's mentioned in the report is the DIF, the Development Infrastructure Fund. And the DIF is intended to be able to deliver infrastructure locally under our own funding sources to be able to do essentially what HIF did, but at a smaller scale. But it's also there, though, although the DIF is currently funded by WECA's investment fund, there is nothing stopping us when we get additional funding from government, such as another HIF type bid, to be able to top up that fund to be able to deliver housing infrastructure. So that's the intention. Although we've put our own money in it to start with, there's no reason that the DIF couldn't be third-party funding from the government to deliver essentially the same thing that HIF has done. Does that help, Councillor James?
Really helpful, thank you.
Okay, unless there's anything else, I'll move on from this. I can't see any other hands up.
Vary,
oh, Vary, sorry, have you got your hand up? Sorry.
I did. I suppose I just wanted a point of clarification. Why this document is coming first, like before the SDS? Because obviously you're mentioning that the assessment, the needs assessment is going on at the moment. And obviously that has a lot of unanswered questions. David, you just mentioned about infrastructure and of course the importance of taking an infrastructure first approach. And we've got the GLTP4 that is also going to be reviewed. Why is this document coming before all of that work has been done? And before we've got, like, for instance, an agreed regional definition around affordable housing?
The strategy's it's come together now around the funding opportunities, because obviously we've got a package of funding that we need to commit schemes to by March 23 in order to take that up. So what we're looking at the moment, probably, I mean, for example, the Development Infrastructure Fund, that's aimed at projects that have either got planning permission or are about to get it, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to take it up the funding in the timescale. Obviously, the SDS programme wouldn't allow for that funding package to be able to be taken up. So we wanted to get it out now so that we can get on with accelerating schemes now. I mean, for example, Hengrove being a great example of something that's been able to benefit from it in order to get going. Whereas it would have had to have waited another 18 months probably for the SDS process to go through.
And could it not have happened, the allocation of that funding, and of course Hengrove, because that's already, something that's being pushed forward anyway, could it not have happened regardless of this document being in existence? Given local authorities are being given within the document their own direction and have got their own policies.
So I guess I think.
Well, I'm trying to ask what problems it's solving, really.
So, the housing delivery strategy is to be clear with central government, particularly, that this is our priority. This is what we want to deliver, both in terms of accelerating the delivery and also maximising affordable. Those are the two things that were written into the devolution agreement, which we've all signed up to, also the WECA authorities. There was never clarity of how that worked. So taking your point, Councillor Frelful, about the programmes designed to, in effect, bring together all the programmes that are within authorities, which they can deliver under their own steam, or they can visibly put forward at regional level to say these are our priorities, which is exactly what Bristol did with Hengrove and with Bottle Yard, which is going through the committee on Friday and is in the investment report papers. What the intention is that those schemes that probably need support beyond the means of the UAs are put forward visibly in a pipeline so members can see, and that they deliver regional output. So it's probably going to be the biggest schemes that go through the process. And by having a visible pipeline, we can say to government, and a process by which we administer the funding, we can say to government, we are ready to take more funding from you when it becomes available. And one of the key things is not to have to bid for things, but to have ready-made strategies in place that we can just absorb the money that comes down, rather than having to spend 6 months putting a bid together. So Councillor James's point about HIF is we're trying to make it easier to do to sort of bid for that kind of funding in the future. In the comprehensive spending review, I appreciate people don't necessarily stay up at night and read all this stuff, but I suppose that I'm sad in that respect. In the comprehensive spending review, there was something called the National House Building Fund, NHBF. That is code for more money coming towards delivering housing within areas. Quite how that works with the planning policy that you mentioned, we're trying to work that through. The government's not been clear.
Okay.
Okay, I'd probably bring this part of this meeting to an end. Thank you, thank you, Karen, very much for your help. That was very helpful. Ian, what have we got next? Is it David?
Well, the next two reports, Chair, are the two remaining infrastructure items, which is the bus network recovery and the transport decarbonisation study. The transport scrutiny subgroup was briefed in detail on this by David last week on Thursday. So I don't know if it might be more appropriate for those members to report back now.
Yes, please. Who would like to report back from that subcommittee?
Shall I do that and then other people can chip in afterwards?
Thank you, Hugh. Go ahead.
So obviously we'll send out the full minutes of the thing attached to these minutes, but well, hang on a sec. Sorry. So as well as the report, we noticed the significant risk. Sorry. There we are. We commented on the significant risk of not exploring franchising as an option. The transport subgroup were very aware of the opportunity cost of not exploring the feasibility of franchising, but we welcome partnership working to try and just increase, to help the help the bus network whilst we're in such terrible times, and whilst patronage levels are so low. Just as another note, we welcome the new managing director of First Group and thank James Freeman for his work in transforming bus adoption. It's a shame now that bus adoption is the lowest it's ever been since he's become managing director, since for things outside of his hands. Also, just as a comment, the largest thing that local authorities can do in terms of carbon reduction for transport is supporting bus patronage. And just like the care industry has collapsed, we couldn't deal with a world where care wasn't publicly funded somehow. The bus industry has collapsed, and we need to make sure that we have a bus network that is ready for the world post-pandemic. There will be increased need to have a viable bus network, even if the patronage isn't there yet. So the local authority is going to have to support that. I don't think I phrased that the best way. Do any of the transport subgroup members have anything extra to comment for it?
Yeah, I think the concern is that clearly without more active involvement, the operators will select a small number of very profitable routes and will try to concentrate efforts there, and we will lose the wider network. And that's made worse by the prospect that at the moment we do have a degree of influence which we can use positively, but it is likely into the future that the amount of funding available from central government might well reduce significantly, which would put us in a much more difficult position to actually try and make certain that we have a viable network.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both very much. Oh, sorry, Vary, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to comment. Unfortunately, I wasn't actually able to make the meeting itself. I think with a lot of the difficulty, there's obviously opportunity as well, to think about how we manage our bus services going forward. I mean, the bus strategy itself was mentioned a bit, but of course that was a very high level document and had quite a lot of operational gaps. So it would be interesting to understand how different models of how future buses and our future bus network is going to be managed in the city is going to be looked at. And I would be quite interested in, there was a comment that there's going to be a renegotiation of some of our local contracts in light of obviously some of the changes. I just wondered what was involved with that negotiation, and also the terms of those contracts, because obviously we don't want to necessarily sign ourselves up to something long term if there is going to be a review of the bus strategy at the end of the year to kind of review those different models. So I just wondered, in terms of a question, you know, what the negotiation of those local contracts are going to be, that's going to involve, the length of those contracts that you're expecting, and how local authorities are going to be involved in that.
Okay. Yeah, David, do you want to pick up any of those points?
Yeah, I think members will understand the context where this is effectively the paper's giving strategic notice to members and the authorities that something's likely to happen. And I think what you're saying, Confer, is absolutely possible. All those things are entirely possible. I don't want to speculate until we've actually seen what the government will do. So all we're doing at the moment in the paper is giving ourselves a position to be able to look at what might be on offer in the next couple of months, and then come back to members and CEOs to say, look, this is what we think. There's a huge amount of unknowns with it as to quite how it will operate, how the legislation, whether they actually need temporary legislation for it as well, whether they're going to rely on a change to the current Bus Services Act to enact it. And then you have the issue that there will be something where there's a short-term situation, maybe for 18 months, while overall, well, on the assumption that we come out of the pandemic and there is some new normal, I think that's the phrase people use, once that's had a sufficient time to establish itself as the baseline, then we'll move to a further operation. And again, it's at that point now where there's a lot of unknown. So there will be an interim situation. And I think the other thing which you know, you could get to this point yourself and work in the document, but there's no clarity that if what's on offer, if you don't accept it, if it is a choice, what's on offer? Is it the status quo? But the status quo won't probably remain as it is, because that funding is unsustainable in terms of central government's finances in perpetuity. So there will be a point in time that they're looking to hope that patronage increases back to somewhere where it was, but also find a amicable way of working with operators and local authorities to ensure that services provided are both commensurate with what we need from socioeconomics, but also aren't necessarily, there is a sense kind of at the moment from government, which you can imagine, that because we're locked down, the amount of services that we were running in December weren't necessary, and hence why there's been some reduction in services that have been negotiated with first. I think there'll be more services clearly after this period ends, but whether it goes back up to there depends on the funding. It depends on how well we collectively advertise the use of public transport. All those things, they're all imponderables at this particular moment in time.
Thank you. Hal?
Yeah, coming from the rural sector of Bath and North East Somerset, we were very welcoming of the bus review proposals to create a pattern of orbital and radial services and to focus on connectivity with interurban services, which now we're clear that many major decisions about future services are going to be taken quite quickly, some of them before August 21. And there's mention of a framework tool. And I wondered, is this an algorithm, or is it possible to have a bit more information about how this works? We pushed Peter Mann at the meeting last week to say, would he or would they be using the connectivity criteria if they were going to cut back on any services? And he was very positive about that, because we know you're doing work on smart ticketing, and therefore you have to have these services that will connect up. The one thing that does seem to worry us a lot is that you're going to make you want some delegated authority here, and you're going to make some pretty swift decisions. And you note that there won't be any time for users and forums to really react. I just wonder if we could revisit that, and whether there was going to be some way in which we could get these decisions out to people and at least reflect back their reactions in the timescale required.
So I guess on the last point, Councillor McPhail, I can only give you the bureaucratic answer, which is that when we see what the government's got on offer in terms of the legislative process and the bureaucracy that's needed involved, whether they require consultation, substantial or minor, we're yet to see. So they'll be dictating to us what we have to do, because it's presumably going to be through the emergency COVID legislation that they set this up, and then they'll let it run for maybe a period of a year or 18 months. So on that is all I can say. We'll have to see what the government say. The delegated decision is obviously in consultation with members. You're right, though, in your first point that yes, it will definitely be based. Any proposal that we take forward to use the funding to create a slightly different network will be based on what's in the bus strategy. And that's being worked up at the moment, and it's going to be discussed with Transport Board members, I think is it the 9th or the 10th of February? There's a paper going to Transport Board on that. So you might want to have a look at the paper as scrutiny members.
And the framework tool that you're using?
Say that again, how sorry, Councillor McPhail.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've developed a framework tool that's going to help you make the decisions. Can we see the workings of that?
Yeah, I don't have any, there's no issue about having that. I think that the principles in the bus strategy are now just being worked up and then to be put in front of the Transport Board members. It was always the case that the Transport Board members would advise the WECA committee on any changes to supported bus services. So it's that process, Councillor McPhail, which is when the transfer of officers happened last year in 2020, at the same time, the protocol for agreeing any changes to the bus network and certainly the supported bus network was agreed. But yes, the working up of the detail is going on at the moment. And yes, clearly that can be available for members to scrutinise as they choose.
Thank you.
So just a quick question. We've only got about 10 minutes left to deal with the decarbonisation as well. GLTP4 was always presented as a sort of interim plan and was going to be updated. When will we get an update on GLTP4?
So again, Councillor Clark, there is an update going to the Transport Board on is it the 10th, Ian? Can you nod? Is it from Wednesday the 10th that the Transport Board is on? So anyway, that the second week in February, Councillor Clark, that is when the proposals for, in effect, developing the next iteration of the local transport plan is going to go to members, and they'll take a consideration on the proposals to do that. What I would say is that there's an awful lot of work. There's probably about £1.75 million worth of work going on in developing the evidence. Partly that's being done through the SDS process, and as you'll read in the decarbonisation paper, that is another element of evidence which will go to the next iteration of local transport plan or planser.
So do you know when the next GLTP iteration will come to this scrutiny committee?
I think probably not until the next committee meeting, Councillor Clark, whenever that happens to be, because to enact the next part of the process needs obviously the WECA committee and the joint committee to agree to it. So it's a full UA process, so it will need both the joint committee and the WECA committee to agree. So at the moment, the proposals in draft are going to the Transport Board in the second week of February, subject to their views on it. That will then be worked up into a formal proposal to the WECA committee in due course.
I suppose my point is we'd love some early scrutiny on it, particularly as I think there's some expertise within this committee, and I wondered if a draft could come to we have an interim informal meeting. I wonder if a draft could come. It's just a request, and you may not be able to do it, but we would like as sort of early sight as possible of that document because it feels very important.
Okay.
Okay, unless somebody's got anything else, I'll go on to the decarbonisation, or I'll ask you, David, to go on to the decarbonisation report.
Again, it was we discussed with the subcommittee last week, so I don't know when anybody from the subcommittee wants to pick up and report back rather than me.
Yes, you.
Sure, we were really supportive. Ultra low West, or whatever the ultra low West low carbon, or whatever the EV strategy name is a bit out of date now. So we welcomed sort of studies looking into replacing that and other areas of sustainable transport. Our suggestion was that electric vehicle was amended to zero emissions vehicles, just because that would be in line with Western Gateway sort of studies at the moment, looking into the option of hydrogen and alternative things, even if it's not the main focus. And that's pretty much the main. Sorry, I've put my notes in about 3 different places, and it's quite difficult when you're feeding back. That was the main comment, other than really welcoming a proper evidence base for decarbonised transport going forward. I don't know if any of the members had anything to add there.
I think that's crucial. There's an assumption that that electric's the only option, and it might turn out that way depending upon how government spending goes in and government investment goes in. But I would be very concerned if we cut off viable options at this stage.
And I've been able to read the bad handwriting. Really also welcoming the look into how you address equity in this sort of area, given that, you know, low income families are those that probably won't be able to most easily sort of adopt an electric vehicle, etc., or to invest in green infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure. Welcoming that specific element for the West of England plan. I know it's something that's lacking from the North Somerset plan. Just that was a useful additional thing noted.
I've got a couple of quick points. Number one, I find it really helpful the kind of the bullet point part about what's happening elsewhere in the country in the report. I think too often we reinvent the wheel, and I'd like that to be sort of carried forward, so we have that on a regular basis, what's going on elsewhere. The other question I had was, I live in a house of terraced streets, a street of terraced houses, and I'd love to get an electric car, but I simply can't because there's no charging points. Is anybody coming up with a potential solution for that? You know, cables across the pavement doesn't work, obviously. David, is anybody coming up with ideas for how to get around that?
We did discuss this with the subcommittee, Councillor Clark, so I'll explain then. In the report, there's a specific action that's recommended, you know, should committee agree on Friday, which hopefully they will do, which was that rather than waiting for somebody else to come along and tell us what a EV charging network should look like, and Councillor James's point about if it was commercially led, they would only go to those areas where they thought usage was going to be highest, because obviously return on capital. So we have asked for the funding to look at creating in effect, a blueprint of an idealised network to take up, you know, clearly your street as well, Councillor Clark, that you live on, so that we end up with a distribution of EV charging points that's blind to incomes. So it's effectively based on, you know, where people are and particularly on where people have on-street parking. The difficulty is that the responsibility for delivering charging points in England is a bit of a mess in terms of who's responsible. So we have spoken to Western Power Distribution at some length over this, and it was their suggestion that what would really be helpful is creating an idealised network, i.e., you know, where they would also then, in tandem with that piece of work, they would look at reinforcing their own network, because obviously the local district network of power distribution needs to be reinforced in some places to be able to accept and accommodate the charging. What's unknown at the moment is who will own and provide the actual on-street charging points, because it's not a legal responsibility of local authorities. It may be something that the government decides they wish to legislate for, or as they have done in the past through the Goal Ultra Low programme that we have in the West of England, they could actually put grant funding to incentivise it. But legally, because local authorities aren't, you know, don't sell energy to the public, that's not a responsibility. So you've got the usual firms like Ecotricity and people like that who will take up. The take-up so far in the UK, cities across the UK, has generally been where there's high usage, so they can get their return on investment in a couple of years from actually owning the kit on the road. So that's what we're hoping to do. But there is, Councillor Scott, we're being honest, there is a degree of uncertainty as to who will actually provide ultimately the charging point that you plug your car into on street.
And the technology, would that be literally in the pavement, or would it be in the lampposts?
Well, that's dead easy. The technology, whether it's, as you say, whether it's a flip up on a pavement, or it's off a lamp column, or it's built into the curb line, those technologies are easily exist. And clearly, I think, you know, if it came down to how it was distributed, that would always be down to almost a street by street consultation and a look at what physically the street's like. As to make sure that it's delivered properly. So again, that's as far as we've got with it, simply because when we've spoken to the government, the regulatory system that we have for utilities makes it quite complicated. One simple solution would be that WPD, who are our district network operator, are just given the responsibility both to reinforce the network and to provide the supply points. But that needs a change to government legislation to enable that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Anybody else got any points on the decarbonisation?
It would be very helpful if we actually looked, because without government intervention or local authority intervention and investment in infrastructure, neither electric nor hydrogen are going to progress very far. Because, and Stephen's pointing out quite rightly, a practical problem with regard to lots of terraced properties, not easy. Could we not do a comparator in terms of providing what the cost would be of providing that basic seed corn infrastructure to allow people to go for low emission vehicles?
So I completely understand your point, Councillor Hopkins. You know, where you look at it, and you're in effect saying you determine where market failure won't provide the service commercially, and then you look to intervene. That's exactly the way that the government looked at rural broadband through the programme. It is vastly complicated, and I think the other thing from experience of having done broadband when I was at North Somerset, the issue always is the Competition and Markets Commission have to determine where you're evidencing that it won't be delivered commercially. This is the point where I suspect at some point in time the government will decide it's just easier to make it either local authorities' responsibilities and fund it, or it makes it WPD's responsibility and funds it, and then you can do exactly what you've just described. But at the moment, that's just a hypothesis.
Thanks. Hal?
Just check. Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wondered, Mr. Carter, if you would comment, but when we talk about these matters in Baines, Councillor Warren and Councillor Wright are quite adamant that Western Power Distribution has nowhere near the amount of power that they can generate that will enable us to get to our targets by 2030.
I don't know if I can comment on that. I mean, WPD don't generate energy in their own right. They distribute it. Somebody else generates it centrally. I think the government have obviously have a long-term profile for the energy needs of the country, and the way the system of funding and subsidy that works the intention is that you will have the generating capacity necessary for the future. So I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I think if it's about grid capacity, that's a well-known problem, that there isn't in all areas sufficient grid capacity on a local network to be able to provide charging points, etc. But again, it's a difficult equation, because you can have a lot of local generation, through solar and PV on roofs. But you've also got to have the network capacity to absorb that and provide the energy to EV charging. So it's a well-known issue if it is a distribution issue, but I don't know, I can't comment on the generation point.
Now, I went to one of the meetings, and what was interesting was WPD was saying that you should have a 3-phase connection to each house because of the amount of electricity they would need with the charging doing the heating. And they said it would be a waste of time not to put 3-phase in each connect.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're the electricity supplier. 3-phase electricity is expensive.
Yeah, make money. Yeah.
I think you've just pushed the envelope of this committee's knowledge there, Hal, but thank you very much. Is there anything else on this item? I'd quite like to wrap it up if I could.
Stephen, I'm just going to put a quick point. Winston.
Yes, Winston, sorry.
Yeah, a lot of this is covered for those that love the detail, and David is one of them, in the 6th carbon budget that was published just before Christmas in the Climate Change Committee. And it's that has to go into legislation by the end of June. That is the biggest piece of work since Nick Stern's 2007 report about the pathway to net zero by 2050. And it actually gives a tailwind option if things go well of how that can be brought forward by at least 5 years. It's well worth the read. It's 1,200 pages, but there's a separate section, which is only 112 pages, which goes into detail about what local authorities and combined authorities can be doing to get to net zero carbon. And that breaks it down between the built environment, transport, and obviously business and electricity generation. And it really is well worth a read for committee members who want to go into the detail. In fact, it is the magnus opus. It's the reference book that for the first time since 2007 plots a course of what needs to be done by when to achieve net zero, and a lot of this detail is covered in that report. I can send a link if that's of any help.
Yeah, I would recommend that as well. It's very well written. Okay, anything else? No. Thank you so much, David. Very, very clear as ever, and you never duck questions. You always try and answer them, which is really refreshing. Thank you. Ian, where are we next?
So next, Chair, we're moving on to the annual business plan.
Thank you.
So Linda Bird, who's our head of planning and performance, can briefly introduce that report for you, Chair.
Hi, Linda. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you'd like to give us a brief introduction, and I'm sure we've got some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm here to present the annual business plan for Weka and the Local Enterprise Partnership. This sets out our strategic activities over the coming year to deliver against our objectives of clean and inclusive growth. It sets out how we're going to work with our partners to achieve this and aligns our activities with our local industrial strategy, our climate emergency action plan, and our regional recovery plan. Obviously, as a business plan this year, it's been developed against a backdrop of considerable uncertainty. The pandemic continues to impact significantly onto the needs of businesses and residents in the region. And I think it's fair to say the true implications of this continue to emerge. We will monitor those impacts as this runs its course. And we've built this as a strategic framework to enable us to flex, to ensure that we can flex the programmes to respond to those ongoing challenges. We bring quarterly progress reports on the plan to you and to the committees during the year, and an annual report is typically brought in the summer. Obviously, last year that cycle was somewhat disrupted, but we are putting in place measures to ensure that we will be doing that in the coming year. Chair, that was all I was going to say on the overall plan. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. So do people have questions on this?
Chair, I've got a question.
Yes, please, Winston.
Just strategically, do skills, we've had an internal debate in Baines about where skills should sit, and it's interesting looking where Bristol, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset and ourselves put it. Have we covered, does the mechanism work where we've got education included in that sufficiently? Because how we do it in Weka is business and skills comes together, and I understand the relationship with the FEs and the 70 providers, etc., and the 4 universities. But are we confident that from the skills point of view, as this is set out, that we've included all the potential stakeholders in developing the skills strategy and taking on board everything to have a successful outcome?
I believe so. I mean, in WECA, skills, as you say, sits within our Business and Skills Directorate. It is actually People and Skills is the title of the directorate, and within that we cover education as well as the sort of further education, the careers advisory. I'm happy to take that away with our Director of Skills and have a separate conversation if that's helpful. I can see Stephen's just switched his camera on.
Just to add, so for the employment skills agenda, we have our employment skills plan, which we published alongside the local industrial strategy, and a whole range of stakeholders were involved in bringing that together. But in addition, we now have a skills advisory panel, which is a requirement by government, but it's something that we would should have anyway in the region, which brings together a range of training providers across higher, further education, independent training providers, but also businesses as well. And that advisory panel also provides strategic oversight of the employment skills plan, just to make sure that what is a very complex ecosystem is joined up as best as it can in the region.
Yeah, the only thing, I think you're right how you're doing it, my personal view. And I think it was in 2008 that skills transferred from the old Department of Education into another area, and it's part of BEIS now. So I think you're following that format, and I think it's right. It's interesting when you look at some of the unitary authorities where they've got skills, they've still got it under education. So I just wanted to make sure that you were content, and I think you are, Stephen and Linda, that we've covered it all, and we've got as you say, that working party and bringing people together who are looking at it from the different lenses. And so I'm personally satisfied, but I just wanted to make sure that you had covered the options. So thanks.
Okay, other questions? I've got one. So, I mean, it's a very clear plan. Thank you. I like the use of infographics. It's all good. But just a couple of points. So if I can take you to the business growth part, you talk about 4 objectives. And likewise in the skills, you talk about a number of objectives. Particularly in the business growth, it doesn't, I know it says underneath working towards our net zero carbon emissions ambition, but it feels to me that there's enough opportunities for green business growth, sustainable business growth around things, carbon aspects of this and renewable energy, that it should be mentioned in the specific objectives, which it isn't. And likewise in the skills, there's no mention of, in Bristol, we need 90,000 heat source pumps to replace gas boilers. And there's no mention of those kind of opportunities, which must be huge, because we have got a real lead in those skills already. And I think it's something we should be highlighting on and putting in this plan. I'll come to Vary first, and then you can think about the answer to that one and perhaps answer the two together.
I mean, my question's really quick. We're probably going to have an election at some point this year. Might be May, might be September, we just never know. I just wondered, 'cause I noticed that wasn't mentioned as a risk within the risk register, whether or not that was sort of thought through in terms of the impact that might have on the business plan.
And actually, I'll just give you my last question as well, and you can answer them all together. Sorry, I forgot this one. Yeah, mine was about the risk register as well. There's no mention of extreme weather events. There's no mention of flooding, we've got sort of landslides, slow landslides happening in Bristol Harbour. None of those climate risks seem to be incorporated into the corporate risk register, which again, I think they should be. So I'll let you and Stephen respond now.
Thank you very much. If I can start with the risk register questions, as they're the closest to me in my notebook. They're both really good questions. We have addressed the election down in our risk register. I'm sorry, it's a bit small on my screen. I'm just looking at the risk. We do have in there that we've addressed that there may be a disruption due to the pandemic. We are managing that. I don't know if Shazia wants to say any more about that. We're working with the Electoral Commission. We've got a team on. Shazia, I can see you've appeared.
Yes, so just to say, obviously the delivery of the WECA election is actually done at local level, so the unitaries themselves will be doing it. And what we're doing is we meet very regularly to make sure that all of those circumstances, all the social distancing and the extra cleaning, all of these things are being put into our plans in terms of how we deliver whenever the election is. So it's covered, and we include it as a risk. But for WECA itself, it's a much smaller risk than with the authorities themselves, because operationally they're delivering the election for us.
Sorry, I meant in terms of the change of leadership, because obviously Tim Bowles is standing down. So regardless, you'll have certainly a change of leadership at that level, and that will affect the business plan.
We haven't put it as a risk. It can be seen as an opportunity, but we'll take that away, Councillor Threlfall, because we're obviously doing work on the first 100 days of whichever mayor we have. So it's an ongoing piece that we're working on. But thank you.
I'll come to you, Gary, in a second, if that's okay. Let's let Linda and Stephen continue with the answers to the previous questions, if that's okay.
Oh, thank you, Chair. The point about extreme weather, I think is a really good one. In individual project and programme plans and those more, if you like, granular risk registers, that impact of external events is picked up. But I think that is a very good point that we haven't thought about that cumulatively in this risk register. So I will take that away. Thank you very much. And then we come back to your first question, or did you want to take a?
No, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the opportunity for reflecting net zero. So this plan, I would say, aligns with our climate emergency action plan. So it doesn't either replace it or duplicate it. They sit together, and this gives us the strategic direction. The work and the detailed projects sit within that climate emergency action plan, and also within the full list of funded projects, which is linked at on the back cover of our plan, which is the full list of everything we've got in delivery. Each of those projects, through our assurance framework, we do look at the climate impact as the funding decisions go through. So
I take that point, Linda, but this is, I'm thinking about the optics really as much as anything else. This is, I suppose, the most public looking document that WECA produce. It's the business plan after all. And I think that aspiration should be reflected in the 4 objectives. That would be my view. Stephen, I don't know if you've got any comment on that.
Yeah, I think I would say that I think it's a fair comment. I think in terms of the activity that sits beneath the objectives, and when you look into the detail that sits behind it, there's actually quite a good narrative there. If you look at things like the green business grants, some of the support that we're going to build into the business support agenda around resource efficiency, the fact that we've commissioned a brief to look at green skills, so we can catch those opportunities and align with the education side. So I guess all I can say is that in the detail, it's very clear that is very much part of the business and skills agenda. I guess it's optics, so I'm not sure what else I can say other than that we'll take that away, and that, Linda, may be something that we can amplify a bit.
Yes, we will take that away. I think in where we'd put it as that line, we'd intended to try and imply this is threaded through everything we do. That was the intention. If that's not working, then we need to take that away and think about that.
I'll come to Gary, then Hugh.
Well, yes, I'd back up Stephen's point, and that might have different solutions, but certainly we're going to have a need to look at new technology, new low carbon technology, and we are in a strong position if we understand that and we use that as part of the recovery as well as carbon reduction. I'd wanted though to back up further actually Vary's point, because there is a risk, but it's a significantly greater risk. We might or might not be happy that there's been postponements in one or two authorities, but it's goes to a higher risk level if the existing incumbent, who would be expected to stay on, has already said he's not going to do that. And therefore, we are potentially left with a significant gap, which would be a significant risk, I would suggest.
Perhaps I'll let Hugh ask your question, and then if you could address the 2 points together, that would be helpful, Linda.
Yes, thank you. So I've got the last 3 business plans all up together. The 2018-19 one refers to improved national international connections, and then has some explanation of what that means as it spanned Bristol Airport. The 2019-2020 one says improved national and international connections. The detail is removed, but there's a little icon of a plane, just to let you know sort of what that refers to. In this 2020-21, it says improved international connections, but the plane's gone and it's got a globe instead. Despite the fact the globe's here and the plane's gone, is the expansion of Bristol Airport still a fundamental part of the business plan and still part of WECA's objectives in the business plan, despite the changes to each plan year on year?
Go ahead, Linda.
Would you like me to answer those? Thank you, Chair. To come to Councillor Hopkins' point about the use of low carbon technology and using that to support our recovery, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a really valid point that we should look to consider. In terms to the icon of the aeroplane, the international connections, I think international connections isn't particularly all about flight. I mean, David might want to say something particular about the airport and the different roles that we all play in that. But we've done quite a lot of work on inward investment, looking at international market prioritization, to look at how we bring business to this region. That doesn't necessarily always involve people getting on a plane. But David, I don't know if you wanted to say about the airport.
Could you just give me a bit more context? Sorry, I just caught the end of that, Linda. Sorry.
So the first business plan said improved international connections as part of the infrastructure plan, and then said expanding Bristol Airport was a key part of this. The second, the last business plan, the one before this one, says improved international and national and international connections as part of the infrastructure plan, but no longer says the specifics of what that involves, but does have a little icon of a plane, just to let you know what it involves. This time it doesn't have the icon of the plane, presumably because it's politically toxic, but still doesn't define what improved national and international connections means. Do we assume that, that expanding Bristol Airport is still part of the business plan and WECA is still supporting that as a key part of it?
I think, I understand the wider context of the question, Councillor Jones. It's not something I can give an individual view on. The airport is in North Somerset's jurisdiction. The planning application that goes to the airport is a matter for North Somerset and now the planning inspectorate. I guess the point is, whatever the outcome of the planning appeal is, we will all have to work with that and actually the extent planning application, the extent permission that the airport currently has, and we've all got to work with that and help decarbonise surface transport, whatever the outcome of it is. So I don't think we're particularly pronouncing a view on the worthiness of airport expansion in general. I think the point Linda made was international gateways are a function of business. You don't necessarily have to
if it's right to interrupt you on that point, this is an infrastructure plan, not a business plan. That's the point for the infrastructure plan rather than the business plan.
Yeah, so they are interrelated. That's what I'm trying to say, Councillor James, that the value of what the port imports, for example, Bristol Port imports, it could be an awful lot of something that's not particularly valuable, or a lot less of something that's very highly valuable to the economy. It just depends. And I think part of the Freeports bid that Stephen's team, Bashford's team, are working on at the moment is in trying to make the best of the international connections that we have, where the value of what's coming in and going out is upped as much as possible. So it's not just commoditized. And I think that's probably true of the infrastructure requirements of the airport. Clearly, the economic output that the airport gives us, in addition to just the operation of the airport in terms of business travel, that is something that, should the evidence be that, to be internationally competitive, we need to help the local business community with the airport do something. That's it. I think it's just a general point. I don't think there's anything too specific about it.
As a comment from this committee then, if it's all right. Oh, sorry, Linda, would you like to chip in first?
Yes, could I add a point that I think might help clarify this a little bit? I've just looked down through the business plan, and the activity that we've linked with that in terms of the infrastructure piece is around the subnational transport body, which is working more within the UK around how we link up our transport.
Hugh, do you think I can add something to this debate? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. But if it's all right, I just wondered, as a comment from this scrutiny panel, could we just ask to make sure that that's really clear, that what that point refers to? Because obviously, whilst North Somerset is the local authority responsible for the airport and desert planning, has rejected it, and that's going to appeal, it would look really bad if Weka looked like it was actually supporting the thing that we well, not a constituent, that's the problem, isn't it? We as a neighbouring authority are doing. So just a bit more clarification in terms of making it clear that Weka isn't supporting or not supporting, because obviously it looks like Weka hasn't got a view on expanding Bristol Airport when it's referring to improving national international connections.
If I can just add, David, the problem with what you said is that Weka has expressed a view. Back in 2009, Tim Bowles wrote to the planning committee and said that Weka supported the expansion. At that stage, Bristol was also supporting the expansion. Bristol now no longer supports the expansion due to a recent motion, and therefore the majority of the unitary authorities on Weka are against the expansion. The current stated position of Weka within the planning process, which is going to the inspector, is therefore wrong, and that needs to be amended.
Look, I could only comment that there is a difference between what politicians, and you're all politicians, and the will of politicians wishes to be in terms of policy statements, which everybody and each authority is free to make, subject to the agreement of their politicians to make a motion, whatever else. The response to 2019 in the planning application was based on our role as strategic planning authority and transport authority. Now, we're not transport authority for the immediate area, but obviously the impact of any changes from a planning application would impact on the transport in the Weka region. And the statement we've made is based on that, Councillor Clark. It's based on the fact that in effect, a neighbouring transport authority who has a statutory function doesn't have a right of veto in terms of a technical appraisal of the TA. And I think this is the point that the planning authority, which was North Somerset, when the TA, the transport assessment, was received from the planning applicant, the objections to that would be the material considerations. We were just proffering a view on the transport assessment that was part of the planning application. So to say there's a difference between, if you like, statutorily, functionally, what our response was as a neighbouring transport authority and what a political might view be on behalf of Weka.
Okay, I've read the comment, and it was very, I consider it very political as well as technical. But anyway, perhaps that's going outside the ambit of this meeting. Thank you for raising that, Hugh. I mean, do others have views on this? Maybe it's not the place to talk about it. I'm not sure. No, it looks like not.
It is a useful place to bring it up, just because this is the one place, this business plan is the one area where it's pretty obvious from looking from other business plan, the previous business plans, what it refers to. So if that,
well, yeah. I think because we're coming to the end of the time, I think we'll note in the minutes that the point was raised, and I think we'll probably leave it there if it's okay. So thank you, Linda, very much for that. Thank you for taking on board the points we've made. Ian, what's next on the agenda?
So the remaining business, Chair, is Malcolm can lead you through the various finance reports which are due for the committee.
Thank you, Malcolm. Be gentle with us, please.
Ditto, Chair, ditto. I've got 6 reports, I'm afraid, this time around. It's a budget cycle. So what I suggest, if that's okay, is I'll break them up and do 2 at a time and then take questions after the 2 reports at a time. So if I start with the LEP budget setting report, which is item 13 on the agenda. Fairly straightforward report. It follows a pattern of previous years. Just to remind members, clearly this is the LEP budgets covering North Somerset as well. The running cost of facilitating a LEP has been fairly consistent for several years now. The running costs are funded by a combination of a LEP capacity grant of 500,000, which is match funded by unitary authority contributions. For the last 3 years, we've kept those contributions down to 110,000 from a standard rate of 150,000 through utilising Treasury management. This time around, because we're winding down a local growth fund and we haven't had a successor to the local growth fund announced for the West of England yet, we're unable to achieve that level of return from Treasury management in 21-22. So we're proposing to keep the unitary authority contributions at the same level, 110,000, and to plug the gap by drawing down against the LEP General Reserve. So that's the main items in the LEP budget setting report. I will just draw attention to figure 2, which is a specific grant attracted through the LEP. That's part of 16 million now. We've been very successful at drawing these grants down. But as I've said to members before, it's a particular bugbear of mine that it's very much grants we need to bid on a reactionary basis, and it's very piecemeal. Yes, we're successful in getting this money down. Wouldn't it be great if we had a greater join up in actually accessing the funding through government in a more logical way? But I'll leave it on that note. Then moving to item 14, Chair, which is the One Front Door report. And again, this follows the consistent format from the previous committee cycles. I guess main things of note this time around is we're very much nearing the end of the local growth fund. So this was the fund which has been running for several years now. The hard deadline of all spend have to be incurred by March 21 still stands. Our local growth fund total allocation for the region, 202 million. And as you're aware, we've been managing this for quite some time now by structured over programming against that 202 million. So we did have a successful announcement of a Getting Building Fund towards the end of last calendar year, 13.7 million. And we're putting 12 million of that against the over programming of the local growth fund. One new scheme this time around is mentioned in the One Front Door report, which is 1.7 million for Western stores in North Somerset area. So just draw members' attention to that. We've been very successful at managing risk in terms of not having to repay any local growth fund to government. We've been swapping different projects between funding streams to minimise that risk, and we'll continue to do so under delegation for remaining 2 months of the local growth fund's duration. So I'm going to pause there, Chair, for that's the first 2 reports on the agenda, numbers 13 and 14. Happy to take any questions.
I've got a couple, but has anybody else got questions? Yes, please, Winston.
Yeah, Malcolm, well done. And I'm very interested in that dynamics of how these things crop up. And WECA does seem to be very good at short notice applying for them. I'm interested in the dynamics with the unitary authority. I mean, you see something, it's flagged to you, you go for it. How does that react with the unitary authorities? I mean, who from Baines or Bristol or South Gloucestershire are particularly looking at low carbon challenge funds, Southwest energy hubs, etc., and some of the other things that come on? It's not just adding to those existing things, it's new things. Do they put in bids, or have you got a good enough relationship with the officers and the unitary authorities that they've already got in their 2, 3, 5 year plan? This is what we'd like to do, and if this comes up, WECA, we're very interested? Or is it you having to be proactive and saying, look, this has suddenly popped up from central government, we're going to go for it? Where we suggest that Baines or Bristol or South Gloucestershire, all 3 of you may want to use it, is on A, B and C. How does that dynamic work?
I think it's very much a team approach, to be fair. We have got very good working relationships at officer level. Myself, in terms of 151 officers, I meet weekly with unitary 151 officers. And the swaps I referred to in the One Front Door report, the funding swaps, is an agreement we have between myself and the finance officers. But both Stephen Bashford, David Carter, similar very proactive relations with relevant senior officers in all of the unitary authorities. And to be fair, it really depends on what funds are up for grabs. So often it's we're the best place to combine authority to submit the grants, but we involve the other unitary authorities before we submit them. So there's full engagement. Other grants have to be accessed through the unitary authorities direct. This is the complicated financial jigsaw unfortunate government currently have. But you know, we have got plans. Clearly, we've got our strategic direction, local industrial strategy, which is evidence-based. So we know if certain grant funding comes up, we have got a narrative to be able to access the funding. But it is very much a team approach.
Thanks. Brian.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to withdraw. I've got a domestic problem that's come up, so I'm going to have to leave.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So my questions were that you got 160k drawdown of general reserve. I mean, the general reserves, I know they're building up from scratch, but they're quite low by certainly by Bristol standards, 2.1%, I think, was it, the reserve? So my question is that a problem, the 160k drawdown? Are you okay with that?
I think there's probably crossover on two reports here, Chair, because the 2.1%, yeah, the 2.1% you referred to is the actual WECA reserve, which is the WECA budget setting. This is the LEP budget setting. So the reserve balance on that, the turnover of LEP is a much smaller turnover than the WECA budget. So I don't have any particular concerns. And it seemed the right thing to do, bearing in mind the financial pressures that all unitaries are under, to try and mitigate having to put those contributions up for 21-22.
Sorry, right, I did mix two things up. So what's the general reserve of LEP then, for the LEP?
So it is stated within the report, I think, and let me just find a relevant part to it. So I'm trying to flip between screens here. Yeah, I thought it's in the report. It's around £600,000, I think, Chair, but I will clarify that outside the meeting. I thought it was actually in the report, but I can't find it to hand with all of the papers I have in front of me.
So that's a significant percentage then of the total.
Yeah, but if I link on to the monitoring, you'll see that the appendix on the budget setting report for the LEP is actually forecasting a revenue outturn at the end of the year of 104,000, because we have achieved surplus in Treasury management. So we'll have 104,000 carry forward from the current financial year, which will add to the reserves, which will take the lion's share of 160 drawdown for 21-22.
Okay. Another thing that caught my eye was this migration integration fund, 140k. Do you know? I didn't know about that. Do you know what that is? And can you give me any?
I tend to know most things finance, Chair, but I'm afraid I don't know the detail of that particular fund. But we can find you an answer outside this committee.
Yeah,
Not sure
so
if any colleagues around the table know anything about that one. I take silence means no, so we'll find you a written answer to that one.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds interesting. It's 140k is the item. Okay. Any other questions on these two reports? Yeah, Vary.
Sorry, Chair. I was trying to work out where my mute button was. My question really is about the A4018, because it says that there's an 8 to 15 month delay, and then there's reallocation of the money that was allocated to A418, which I think, you know, Brenda and others, in fact, we had a statement earlier today from Tony Lloyd saying how important certainly public transport improvements, etc., were. That money is then gone to the Bristol Beacon, which I'm assuming is obviously Colston Hall's new name. Why? I mean, yeah, I just thought that was odd. I mean, is it often that we would reallocate transport funding to cultural projects? So
the change request for the A418 was submitted by Bristol. To be perfectly blunt, as I referred to in my presentation, the actual funding stream of the LGF is very time limited. So because of delays in A418, we wouldn't have been able to incur the relevant spending time to be able to draw down against the LGF. So we clearly wouldn't want to run the risk of having to return that funding to government. So
Okay.
you'll see there's a small amount left in for the A4018, which are legitimate costs we will incur by the LGF deadline. Bristol submitted the change request to make sure that we've transferred the funding to a legitimate scheme where we could draw down within the time constraints.
Okay.
And obviously it's then up to Bristol to then find alternative funding to finalise that scheme, but it's outside the LGF timescale.
Okay, so the delay to the A418 happened before the funding challenge. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Any other questions on these two? No? Okay, Malcolm, do you want to carry on?
Okay, so if I take the next two reports then, Chair, the Mayoral budget setting report is probably the most straightforward of all of them. Just to remind members, the Mayoral budget is made of three main components. One is a small amount of running costs of Weka Mayor office, which is circa £245,000. So that's been in situation for some time now. The second part is the annual contribution towards the Weka election costs, which is an annual drawdown of just short of £400,000. Clearly, will be utilised in the full drawdown hopefully in 21-22 to fund the cost of Weka mayoral elections later on this calendar year. So what we do is we budget for that on an annual basis. We put money into reserve, and every 4 years we draw down the full amount, being the cost of running that election. And the final component of the Mayoral budget setting report is the passporting of the highways and transport capital grants from the combined authority to the unitary authorities, and we've maintained the same level and apportionment of a 17.5 million capital grants, and everyone's clearly aware of what money is coming through into the unitary authorities budgets in that regard. So that budget report is very straightforward. The WECA budget setting report, slightly more complicated. This follows exactly the same format as we used in setting the 2021 budget report. It does set the medium-term horizon. It breaks the budget down into the component parts, and it shows how the WECA budget is made up. So we start off with the core grants, which again we've outlined in this report still remain volatile. So our core funding of Mayoral Capacity Fund is still an annual allocation of £1 million. We have had email confirmation for 21-22, but we have no guarantee beyond that year. Similarly, our business rates retention, 5% share for Weka, 1.2 million. Again, that's rolled forward into 21-10-22 with no guaranteed revenue funding beyond that time. The rest of the main part of our revenue budget now is broken down with the specific grants. We have obviously a big chunk of money for the adult education budget. Then we have the actual transportation levy. And I will draw members' attention to the transport levy. This is one we obviously work very closely with all the unitary authorities on. So we look at the demands. We have been maintaining payments to bus operators in terms of concessionary fares based on budgeted profile throughout the COVID pandemic. That's following DfT advice and consistency of what's happening throughout the country. There will be pressures on the transport budgets in 21-22. We will have to re-tender some of those bus routes which have come up for renewal during the financial year, and clearly for reduced patronage, there's likely to be cost pressures when we look at going out to procurement. So we have agreed with the unitaries, as we stated in last year's budget, a 2% uplift in the levy for 21-22. And so we're proposing an overall levy of 19.5 million with a 2 million contribution from North Somerset. The other main elements of the Weka budget are the approved investments fund schemes, particularly ones that Weka are leading on, where we're incurring revenue costs for feasibility development in areas such as mass transit, and also the approvals of revenue budgets for the unitary authorities-led investment fund schemes. So the overall budget is not too dissimilar to 2021. It is, I think it's just over £56 million is the total budget we are proposing to committee on Friday. And as raised in the last item, Chair, we are trying to maintain reserves as healthy as possible Any end of year surplus that we have for 2021, we'll be looking to top those reserves up. At the moment, our reserves are some 2.1% of our total revenue budget. And as a finance director, clearly I much prefer that to be a higher figure, but I'm very mindful of financial pressures that we all face. The appendix on the budget monitoring in the current year does demonstrate that we're forecasting an end of year surplus. Some of that relates to the existing levy, and the first 220,000 of that surplus on any transport levy would be returned to Baines as previously agreed by committee. We'll be looking towards moving a big chunk of that surplus should it materialise at the end of the year to top up reserves should the situation arise. So a lot in there, Chair. I could go on for hours. There's a lot of information, but I think I should just pause there and take questions, please.
Again, I've got a question, but do others have questions? No, okay. So my question is, and I think this is the right place, we're talking about staff appointments and staff capacity and so on. What third-party consultants do we have, and are those listed somewhere?
We have a variety, and normally third-party consultants are brought in for specific projects, specific purposes. So they're not there covering core Weka activities. So as we diversify and we're involved in more complicated areas such as, I don't know, mass transit or major rail development, clearly we'll be engaging consultants. So if I use an example, future transport zones. So where we got new grants coming in, we would engage consultants for specific purposes. We will not use consultants as a norm for core Weka revenue. In terms of who we use, we do, like all of yourselves as unitaries, we publish transparency reports on a monthly basis, which cover all of our transactions and spend above £500. So there is complete transparency in terms of who we pay money out to. But I just want to reassure members your consultants are engaged on a as needed basis as opposed to a core capacity basis.
No, I wasn't suggesting for a moment they weren't. It's just we've had some experience, particularly in Bristol, of the figures around consultants being rather difficult to get a hold of. So where did you say that we could, I mean, is there a report somewhere that says this is the number of staff members and this is the number, this is the amount of consultancy time we've used in the last month or the last year or whatever?
We've got information on staff numbers, Chair. We can produce that to members at any time. In terms of consultancy spend, we don't have a separate report on that. We don't engage consultants to the same degrees as unitaries. I mean, we could gather that information. Yeah, what we do is we look at the entire budget of the organisation, but we haven't got a particular report based on consultancy spend. If there's an issue that you want us to raise, we can find that information out.
Okay, I'm quite interested in that. If I could just, as a kind of snapshot of what the position is now, I'd be interested in knowing how many consultants we have and how much they're costing us, if that's okay.
I'm happy to take that request away and we can provide information.
Thank you. Do others have questions on these two reports? No? Okay, thank you, Malcolm. What else?
Okay then, so my final two, number 17 on the agenda is the Capital Strategy and Treasury Management Investment Strategy Report. Quite a technical report. It's a requirement of CIPFA, which is the accountancy profession for public sector. So it's an important report for us accountants. Again, it follows the similar format to the one we set for 2021. I will just draw attention to the appendices. So we have the Weka investment strategy, which we published in November 19. That clearly lays out the use of Weka funding, particularly the investment fund and transforming cities fund, and what that funding can or can't be used for. I will draw members' attention to that because we're just at the back end now of our first 5-year government gateway review. So that's been reported back from SQW, who have been contracted to do these gateway reviews across all the combined authorities. And we had a challenge event with representatives from CLG and Bays and Treasury last week, and we're expecting the outcome of that 5-year gateway review to be announced in March. And I'm feeling very positive about it, but it's important that the investment strategy is a core component because it does detail what our funding can or can't be used for. The other main appendix I'm going to draw members' attention to is the Treasury management strategy. Now, you'll be aware from our monitoring reports, we've been incredibly successful in exceeding our Treasury management targets in the last 3 years, and we'll continue to strive to do so. But getting any sort of returns in the current climate on cash balances is incredibly challenging. So the sort of returns we're getting now for putting money out with other local authorities, which is quite a core part of our Treasury management activities, we're lucky to get 0.2% on 12-month money. So the strategy does set the parameters for us to be able to place investments. It places limits in terms of and authorised organisations where we can place monies with, and it does set the framework. And we will continue to push the boundaries within that framework to maximise returns. But I'm just raising the issue that it becomes increasingly difficult in the current economic climate. So that's item 17. And the report which tends to generate the most debate at committee is the investment fund report, which is item 18. Members will be aware that we've had the £350 million WECA investment programme in place now for some time, which runs up to March 23. In October last year, we challenged the deliverability and prioritisation of that programme in the light of COVID, and we brought £36 million back to the table late last year. In December committee, we had a couple of drawdowns against that headroom. One was Hengrove Park, and a couple of other big areas were about the enabling funds referred to earlier in this committee around the Development Infrastructure Fund and the Housing and Regeneration Enabling Fund. So this report deals with further recommendations on this cycle. Clearly, it's the last WECA committee before June, so there's a big gap time-wise. So in order to make sure we maintain momentum on the approved schemes in our programme, we are seeking some delegations here to the Chief Executives groups to make sure we can maintain momentum in delivery over the coming months. So the larger items which we're seeking approval for on Friday, there's the Bottle Yard business case, which is a drawdown from the Development Infrastructure Fund and the Housing Infrastructure Fund. It's 11.73 million we're looking for on that one. There is an element of repayment, around 50% repayments over a 5-year period on this. It does represent good value for money. It ticks all the right boxes in terms of the funds we set up. And that's the next big scheme we're looking for approval for in this committee. Other highlights in this report, members hopefully be aware that as part of our 350 million programme, we kept £20 million back in reserves initially to respond to opportunities and challenges, to try and lever further funding in from government in terms of match funding. And such a situation has arrived in terms of Kingswood High Street. So we're looking here to allocate 7.56 million now from the WECA investment fund to be able to lever in over £12 million of match funding from government around Kingswood High Street, which is clearly a good use of our WECA funding. And the final big one this time around, recommendations 8 and 9, relate to a full business case for the Innovation for Renewal and Opportunity project. As I say, that's around 6.7 million in total, and that's a drawdown from the business and skills allocation, which has been reported on for some time in the investment fund reports going through committee cycle. So a lot in there, Chair. It's the last cycle, as I say, before June. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, do people have questions on that? Again, yes, please, Jeff.
Well, Steve, it's really, first of all, Malcolm's comment about delegated powers, and I just wondered, Malcolm, if you can remind us what the process is for delegated decisions being communicated to the public and to scrutiny. And then, Steve, the secondary bit of that was that June is a long time if elections happen in May. June could theoretically be a lot longer if elections were actually happening in July, because it couldn't then happen until August or September. So what alternative plans are there in place? And Steve, for you, the question of what should we as Scrutiny be planning to do? Because we certainly should not be going away between now and June. Certainly until May, we need to make sure we do have a programme in place and we don't just lose the chance to develop our knowledge and hold to account. So some wide-ranging issues there, but first one is about how the delegation is communicated.
So I see Shazzy's put a camera on, Chair, so I'm sure Shazzy wants to come in. But if I could just reassure members, first of all, that the programme we have, the £350 million programme, is fully programmed out. So we have got clarity about all the projects we're delivering. So for the majority of the delegations we're putting in place to cover the period between now and June is to maintain momentum on those approved schemes. The only exception to that, where any new schemes coming in, would be under the devolved funds, which are the Land Acquisition Fund and the Development Infrastructure Fund, and there's clear criteria around those. But in terms of reporting back, anything done under delegation will come back to the next cycle of committee, but I understand in terms of delay. So Shazza, you want to come in terms of the process?
So just to confirm, it's a statutory requirement that we publish any decisions taken by officers. And the way that we've done delegations at WECA is it's ordinarily either to the chief exec or a director in consultation with the other unitary authorities. So it's a decision that everyone's involved in. We do publish those. We have published decisions in the last 6 months, primarily over urgent decisions, COVID decisions, but all officer decisions will be published. And just to say, the difference between a delegated decision and a decision taken at committee is the call-in aspect. So your role as scrutineers is to call officers to account. So if there's a decision that occurs that you want more information on, you call that officer to give account as to why they made that decision and what information they took into account. And just on Councillor Gollop's last point about the meetings, so what we've got is our next meeting is scheduled for June. If the election moves, then we have provision for a March meeting, and clearly we will make sure we've got those meetings in the forward plan. We will ensure that we take account of the pre-election period, but what we have is mayors and leaders meetings, I think every 3 weeks. We can always convert those into public meetings if we need to.
And to respond to... Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Just follow up, Steve, because thank you for that. I certainly don't have a problem with delegated decisions. I recognise decisions have got to be taken in between meetings. My only concern is the process by which scrutiny members are aware of those delegated decisions. Now, this might just be a failing on my part, but I have to admit that looking at the WECA website to see whether there's any delegated decisions isn't the first thing I do each morning. And it's really just a plea that if there is no meeting for 5 months, is there some mechanism whereby on a monthly basis scrutiny members could be notified of the delegated decisions?
If it's justice, then Ian publishes the decisions on our website. We can circulate them to you as well at the same time.
I was just going to say, Chair, to coincide with the publication, every time there's an officer delegation, I can send the link to scrutiny members to coincide with the publications. We can do that.
Thank you.
I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, and Jeff, to respond to the challenge to me, if you like, I mean, we've got an extra meeting coming up in a couple of weeks about the enlargement of WECA. We've also got an informal scrutiny happening in around about a month's time. So I kind of hope we will be fleet of foot enough, depending on what happens with the elections, to be able to organise ourselves to carry on with the scrutiny function. But I'm always up for people sort of jabbing me and saying, I don't think we're meeting enough, or we need to be meeting here. So, please, people, I would ask members to do that. Is that okay, Jeff?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Malcolm?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, please, Winston.
Malcolm, I'm interested in page 194 on the capital strategy including treasury management and investment strategies. So I just wanted to understand this and other members. So at the moment, we've got a balance around 250 million, and 40 million of that is more than 12 months. And some of that is in equities. So if I'm looking at this money market funds on page 195, we've got Aberdeen Liquidity, Federated BlackRock Insight, then we've got some pooled funds. So if that's correct, and I'm reading it correctly, the investment strategy there, I mean, do we have an ESG policy? Do we have an ethical funds policy? what's guiding us on where we're investing these money market funds?
So if I talk to page 195, it's quite a good one. It does give a snapshot of money that we hold. It does look at, our balance there, I'd say is 250 million. The money, just to break down what we have there, the money market funds are liquidity. So the top parts of our sheet on page 195, money market funds and notice accounts are our liquidity to be able to mobilise funds quickly. The pooled funds, you're quite right, Councillor. These are the ones where we put money away longer term. So the pooled funds are a vital part of our investment portfolio, because these are the ones which maintain some level of reserve in a difficult economic climate. So they're returning around between 3.5% and 4% on that 23.9 million of pooled funds. In terms of ethical investments, we are guided very much from Arling Close, which are Treasury management advisors, and we've been challenging them, as of many of local authority clients, about can you bring more green and ethical funds back to the table. Now, the organisations they do recommend have been very clearly vetted, but are they actually leading lights in terms of ethics and green investments? Probably not. So it's something that Arling Close, our Treasury management advisors, are looking at. They have set up what's known as an ethical group, an ESG group, of which we are subscribing to as WECA. So we're keeping an active interest and watchful brief on Arling Close. But at the moment, I've got to be perfectly blunt. Most of our investments have been with other local authorities. It has been on very much a 12-month rolling basis, because we're very mindful that the excessive cash balance we have at the moment will diminish quite quickly between now and March 23 as we start incurring the capital costs of our investment programme. So we don't put that much money away for longer term.
Okay, well, I know of Arling Close, but obviously we've got certain policies in place in WECA, and it's an obvious thing that we just worry about on the climate change investment and various things like that. But it sounds as if you've got it covered. Just on the local authorities where we lend this money to, I mean, are they using that for working capital, or are they then investing it in something else? I mean, do we know what happens to that 208 million?
Most of the investments are fairly short-term in nature, so it's 12 months or less than 12 months. So a lot of it is to cover cash flow. So to be blunt, we act as an alternative to the Public Works Loan Board. So we slightly undercut the Public Works Loan Board. We use brokers, so we know which local authorities are looking for loans. We know how much cash we got clearly, and we try and get a better rate from that than we would do in a bank or building society account, and they get a slightly better rate than they would do if they went through PWLB. So they tend to be sort of plugs and holes in cash flows, planned cash flow from other local authorities. We have also, we launched last year a local authority loan scheme for the West of England. So although at the moment there's been no take-up because there has been no need, we would give priority to Baines, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset and Bristol for any requirement for loans. So our liquidity we keep in our money market funds and notice accounts can be provided to our own West of England local authorities should needs be.
And you tend to undercut the public loan, what's it called? Public
Works Loan Boards, PWLB, yeah.
When you're saying, well, I mean, because they were at 1.2%, they went up 2.4%, back in October 2019, I think, overnight. I don't know where they are at the moment. Is it too much detail to ask you where they are at the moment?
You can get 1 year money or anything less than 1 year money at ridiculously cheap rates from any organisations at the moment. So I think short-term money you can get something like 0.2, 0.3%. So yeah, the whole environment's changed beyond recognition. So we were getting on these 12-month investments over local authorities, we're getting 1.1, 1.2% a few months ago. Putting 12 months out now, you're lucky to get 0.2%, as I say. So it's that's what we've got to be challenging and considering. What it's a nice problem having money in the bank, but we've got to balance. The whole Treasury management thing is a balance between risk and reward, but we need to make sure we can get best return whilst not gambling with the money.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much.
Of course, it wouldn't necessarily be a nice thing if we moved to negative interest rates, which appear to be coming towards us in the market. But presumably you've got a contingency plan for that, have you?
We obviously keep a close watch on that. So again, we link very closely to Ireland Close. They've got economic forecasts. In fact, with the audit committee, as Councillor Gollop will know, we had a presentation from Ireland Close about their views about negative interest rates and the economy and where it's going. It is a risk. We try to diversify our portfolio to mitigate that risk, and we use our investments accordingly, really. I'll be quite honest. The pooled funds we have, we'll be looking to extend the holding of pooled funds. Because it does give us a reasonable return, 3.54%. So we will be looking to try and up our pooled fund, not by a huge amount, but that will mitigate then any risk of further drops in a already historically low interest rate environment.
Thanks. I was also going to ask a question about the page that Winston referred to. On the same sort of issue, really. I mean, I see we've got quite a lot of money invested with BlackRock, who, have had issues around ethicality, if that's the right word. I would encourage us, and I would quite like this committee to be involved in that ethical investment programme. And I suppose I'm a bit surprised we haven't got one in place already, to be frank, but I don't know if you want to respond to that or not, Malcolm.
Happy to look at incorporating that into our strategy. I can comment on BlackRock. It's not an investment as such. It's a money market fund, so it's purely liquidity. So we wouldn't be placing money with BlackRock for any more than it is sort of is holding of our cash. So the whole money market funds are our liquidity tool.
But we're presumably so. Are we getting, so I don't understand that then, we're getting money from BlackRock, we're giving them our money to do something with, and we're getting interest in exchange, is that right?
Yeah, but it is a sort of money in, money out situation. So all 4 of those money market funds, Aberdeen, Federated, BlackRock and Insight, are tools for managing our cash flows. So it's, the balance of BlackRock is 6.7 million. You'd look at the average rate there, it's 0.04. So this is pretty much overnight money. It's like a holding account where money comes in and out to manage the cash flow ups and downs.
I suppose what I'm talking about is our position of leadership and the sort of reputational impact of, I mean, I'm not sure people know that we have money even overnight with BlackRock. So that's interesting, and it might be something worth considering. I would just repeat really that I think that we should make that a priority to have that ethical investment fund or policy in place. But I've made my point. You don't have to respond. The other point I had was it's around the Kingswood High Street investment. Is that a future high street? Has that come out of future high streets? And did that in turn come out of the Love Our High Streets scheme we had?
So we already had 10 million for Love Our High Streets, as you say, which we launched some time ago as WECA, and there's a notional allocation for Kingswood. So it's a combination, Chair. So it's 7.5 million matched WECA funding we're putting forward now. We had 2.5 million already from the 10 million of the WECA Love Our High Streets pot. What we're suggesting this time around is we top that up by a 5 million drawdown from the WECA Opportunities and Challenge Fund. So that's a separate pot of money in terms of WECA Investment Fund. And that's purely in response to the good news we received back end of last calendar year about Kingswood being allocated £12 million of government funding, but requiring that match. So it's a combination of both. So it's not swallowing up all of the Love Our High Street fund from WECA.
Okay, thank you. Do others have questions on Malcolm's comments about these reports? No? So I think you're going to talk about the business rates pooling. Are you, Malcolm?
Yes, I'm happy to talk to this one. So this is the it's a requirement to report back to Scrutiny on an annual basis. Members might be aware that I gave a presentation on this last year. It's a very complicated issue, the business rates pooling and how the whole city deal works. So just to refresh members on how it does work. So the city deal is in place for 25 years. It does include North Somerset as well. And what the city deal enables us to do is maintain 100% of the business rates growth in the region above the 2013 baseline level And what we tend to do with that growth, or what we do with that growth, is we use the surplus income generated by that to facilitate borrowing to fund the Economic Development Fund. And the forecasted growth enables the Economic Development Fund to pump back £500 million of capital investment on economic development priority schemes over the next 25 years. So what the pooling board do is that they monitor the performance of the business rates growth. They make sure we're hitting our targets in terms of, are we receiving enough growth to generate the borrowing required to meet the Economic Development Fund projects. The EDF projects have been programmed out for some time. All the unitary authorities have had involvement in that, and all the projects are profiled out for 25 years based on when the cash flow is anticipated from this business rates growth. So this update report was given to the board back end of last year. It's related to Q2 figures, and it does state quite clearly in the actual report that our estimated growth in 2020-21 is less than anticipated when we set the budget. Now that's no surprise in the current COVID situation. So we're anticipating the growth of being just over 27 million in 2020-21 compared to the budget for the year, which is 28.4 million. So some 1.3 million short in that 1 year. I will say, however, the change between Q1 and Q2 has been incredibly positive. So in Q1, we were going to miss that budget by a much bigger figure. So it does demonstrate the recovery we encountered between Q1 and 2. Overall, the 25-year position of the fund is still looking healthy. We are still exceeding our overall growth targets for the EDF. And a city deal, but we do need to keep the situation under close watch. So the medium to long-term impact of COVID will clearly impact on the 25-year forecast. And we have just recently commissioned some work from a company called Pixel to help us forecast what that medium-term impact on business rates will be. So I guess what we're reporting this time around, Chair, is there's been a dip compared to budget for the current year, which is not surprising, but the overall fund remains healthy. The work between the authorities is strong. The pooling board works very well. Myself and all the Section 151 officers sit on that board, and we monitor the situation very carefully under the current climate. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that? I think that's, as always, very, very clear, Malcolm. Thank you. Okay. If there's no questions on that, I think we can move on. Ian, is that the end of the formal agenda?
It is, Chair, yes.
Thank you. So I'll go on to AOB. Anybody got an AOB? No? And when is the next informal meeting, Ian? Do you know?
I think we do need to actually finalise that date, Chair, but I think we need to look at the programme for the next 2 or 3 months anyway, building in this additional meeting anyway. So we'll do a programme for the next 3-4 months.
Okay. And as ever, you'll do a draft of a report for me to give to the WECA meeting on Friday. I'll circulate that around this committee and I'll give the report on Friday.
And
anything else?
We'll discuss the dates with you, Chair, just so that we can plan them over the next 6 months, because obviously we can still have informal meetings. And I think some of the briefings, some of the questions today, it would be useful for you to have some more briefings with some of the officers, for instance, on housing and transport generally.
And I think we've decided this extra meeting on the expansion of WECA needs to be a separate meeting.
Absolutely.
So that as well as the informal meeting.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll do that as soon as possible. I did just want to clarify one thing that was said during the meeting. The current mayor will stay in post until the next election. So it was just to ensure there was no uncertainty over that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody got anything else?
Yeah, one point for me, Stephen. This
Yes,
you and I think, are the two that have read this 6 carbon budget, and that's got major. That could be, along with COP26 happening in November. That I suspect this is going to be a year of quite radical change on on this whole issue. Just who out of the senior leadership team is particularly leading on climate change, or is it the senior leadership team as a whole? If we wanted to sort of just probe how they might react to that report in particular, and the separate report, the 112-page report about the effect that what unitary authorities and combined authorities should be aiming towards. Is there one particular officer, Ian, Shazia, who leads on that climate change?
No, it's the WECA management team as a whole,
right.
And Patricia, as our chief exec, would
right.
effectively be the lead officer.
Okay. All right, Stephen, you and I may talk about this offline. I don't want to waste anyone's time at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of weakness we raised at the time, isn't there? That there isn't really one particular person who's taken responsibility.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it may be a weakness, but the advantage is collectively they're all embedded into climate action, so it may be an advantage.
Yeah.
There we go.
I mean, if you were willing, for example, to talk about the sixth carbon budget and local authorities for a short briefing at one of our informal meetings, I think that would be helpful, Winston.
Yeah, I'll be pleased to do that. I really think it's a bit of a game changer, particularly because this is the first time since 2007 it's been mapped out what needs to be done. It's just a question of how quickly it can be done. And all right, technology is changing, and blue hydrogen and green hydrogen and things like that, and carbon capture, but it is a very well, as you said, thought out document, and government have to act on this. They have to pass it by the end of June. That's part of the Climate Change Act that was put in 2008.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Ian and Shazia, and the other officers, David, Malcolm, and anybody I've forgotten. Thank you, committee members. I found it interesting, learned some stuff, and we'll be in touch about future meetings. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.